Now, in a singular first-time opportunity, this is like the first time I've ever done this for the Patreon episode. I've already posted the main episode.
Wow.
That went so long. I had to take a break. I had to refuel, and long in a good way.
Yes.
Like good long.
Yeah, we
like
nailed it.
The coiling tentacles of Cthulhu. 3 hours and let's see here, 21 minutes, something like that.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Did we break the record?
I think
maybe
close. Very close. It's top
Close.
3 for sure.
Okay.
We're, it's been, and it's like, and Brad and I, this is a little inside baseball here, but Brad and I have been in the background talking about, do we need to break these episodes up? Do they need to be 2-parters or 3-parters? And I'm the guy who does the post, and I've got my post down to a science. It's boom, 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 and that thing is out, and I like it that way. And Brad's like, I think maybe we need to do 2 or 3-parters. And I'm like, that's kind of 2 or 3 times as much work for me, Brad.
Right.
Yeah. I'll tell you this. My favorite podcast is Hardcore History, Dan Carlin's podcast. He does like 5-6 hour episodes. And I'll listen to those like on a road trip, and they're captivating.
I have no aversion to clicking on a 3-hour episode of something. That's cool. Because to me, it's like, they must have went deep. So it's good. But I think some people are like, I don't know if I want to get that deep into it. So,
this is the Patreon episode. So we listen to our listeners, but we especially listen to our patrons. So if you have an opinion about that, if you think, maybe that Lovecraft episode could have been 2 parts or 3 parts or whatever you think, let us know. And then, of course, we're also inviting people into the Telegram, too. We've got, 20-some people right now. We'd like to grow that. You can find it at the website, artofdarkpod.com. But we are back for After Dark with the great Ben Thomas, who really demonstrated his knowledge of the life and the work of H.P. Lovecraft, with a helping hand, of course, from Brad, who kind of kept everything on track. And I had a feeling we probably could have gone on for another 2 or 3 hours just riffing.
There was a point where you hit it. I was like, all right, I'm just going to scroll past all of those pages.
Yeah. So if it hadn't been for Brad, this would have been a 10-hour episode.
Hey, maybe there could be some other, there might be a room for more Lovecraft talk at some point when we're doing it right now. I mean, the one thing I want to get into for the After Dark for the patrons, if you're a patron, you've probably already listened to one of these. And if not, welcome. We like to keep something from our research that doesn't detract from the overall story, but that we think is interesting. And in this case, I think we've got something that for me was very interesting, and it's investigating this question of was Cthulhu real? Now, Lovecraft himself was an avowed atheist. At least, that's what he would say. And I think that's probably what he believed about himself. When he was younger, one thing we didn't say is he did have some dalliances with old school paganism. And when I say paganism, I don't mean like Wicca. I mean, like, he believed in like the Greek gods, or I think it was actually the Roman gods, if I'm not mistaken, Ben.
Far worse set of gods.
Yeah.
His relationship with classical mythology is interesting in that way, because it's hard to sometimes know exactly how much he's actually believing in something and how much he's LARPing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
you get the same thing when he's talking about his lucid dream world. There's one passage in a letter to a friend where he says, I half believe that the dream world is actually the real one, and this one that we're living in now is the fiction. And you're like, well, what does he really mean by that? I sort of half believe that. Is he saying that that's true, that he thinks that? And he's, as we're going to see probably over the next half hour, he likes to play with those boundaries between fact and fiction, belief and skepticism.
Yeah, for sure. Now, to further dig into this question, we gotta bring another couple of figures in to really articulate this. One of them is a man named Peter Levinda. Peter Levinda is an occult historian. He's written books on UFOs. And he's written books on, he has a book, I think, about how Hitler escaped Germany, and he's one of these kind of figures, but a very erudite guy, very well spoken, very detail oriented guy who also is fascinated and enamored with Aleister Crowley, Kenneth Grant, and H.P. Lovecraft. Now, Peter Levenda's Lovecraft fanaticism goes so deep that he most likely wrote the Necronomicon. Is that still commonly thought then?
Necronomicon.
Necronomicon. First of all, I do want to say thank you.
You're right. I left the syllable out.
But I do want to thank you for pronouncing Crowley's name correctly, because almost nobody does. And it
What
drives
do
me
most
nuts.
people? What do most people say?
Say Crowley. Most people say Crowley, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
So
Mr. Crowley.
Mr. Crowley.
So there was actually a little couplet that Crowley wrote. He said, my followers call me holy, and so they call me Crowley. My enemies treat me foully, and so they call me Crowley. So that's how I remember it.
That is so great, because that is settled now. That is official, and only the Patreon subscribers got that. So that's very good.
Nice,
awesome.
Nice. So in talking about these, again, about Peter Levenda, is that the commonly thought who wrote the what did they call the Simonicon?
Yeah, it's called in 1970. I'm going to look at the date here. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah,
I'm going to start calling it, after that episode, I'm going to start calling it the Necronomicon.
Necronomicon. I always thought it would be great to write a cookbook called the Necronomicon. So
that's a great idea. Yeah.
It's all tentacles. It's all squid, octopus.
Yep. So Peter Levenda writes the book that becomes known as the Simon Necronomicon. This comes out in 1977 by Avon Book. The paperback is by Avon Books. It was first published by a company called Lovecraft, which was a hardback. This is a really interesting treatment of. So to give a little bit of context, I'm going to assume that listeners have some sense of what the Necronomicon is and what it means in Lovecraft's mythos. But Lovecraft was very clear that this was a fictional book, and he explicitly said, whenever people asked him about it, that this was a fictional book, and he had made it up himself. And he never actually wrote out the full text. He just wrote excerpts from it that he would use in various stories. Shortly after his death, as he started to become more popular, people started playing with the lines between reality and fiction. They started asking for copies of the Necronomicon from antique bookstores. Because, see, Lovecraft had not just said that the Necronomicon was a book, he'd actually created an entire fictitious publication history for it. He said that it was translated into English by John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's alchemist and sacred geometry expert. There was like a Spanish edition that was printed at some point during the Inquisition. There were all these specific editions that were supposed to have been printed at various times in history, and people would go to antique bookstores and request these non-existent books, creating all kinds of confusion. People would go to libraries and add cards for the Necronomicon to the card catalog and say, like, the book was currently checked out, so other people would go and find it and think that it was real. And of course, as in the 60s, as the hippie counterculture takes up H.P. Lovecraft, nobody loves a good prank like, Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. And so they start putting Lovecraft into the real world. It becomes an alternate reality. And in the heat of this, in the late 70s, the Simon Necronomicon gets written, and Peter Levenda is the author. It's a weird book in the sense that it draws less from Lovecraft than from Sumerian mythology, which is really odd. So it takes sort of the structure of a few quotes that are used in some of the Lovecraft stories. Most of the names of the gods and the magical words and the rituals and things like this, it's ancient Mesopotamian Sumerian stuff. And it becomes, but despite the fact that the author is known and the publisher is known, and this is obviously not the book that Lovecraft was referring to in his work, rumors start to circulate that it's real, that this is actually the real text. And around the same time, rumors start to circulate that H.P. Lovecraft and Aleister Crowley had been friends, which, although they were contemporaries, there's no evidence they ever met or even read each other's work. And that the two of them had collaborated from the secret text of the quote-unquote real Necronomicon to create this. And this is where the myth really enters the world of, this is where we really start to enter the alternate reality.
So let me give you, I have a copy of the Necronomicon right here, the one that we're talking about. Let me read you the back of it to show you how blurry this line is getting. H.P. Lovecraft himself denied the book's existence, but the dreaded Necronomicon has finally surfaced. Written in Damascus in the 8th century AD by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, the accursed volume is filled with myths and rituals that have survived the darkest days of magic and occultism. Long forgotten formulae for evoking incredible things, beings, and monsters into a physical appearance. Editor Simon overcame huge obstacles during his daring efforts to bring to light this, the most famous, the most potent, and potentially the most dangerous black book known to the Western world. Right. So it's posed as, it doesn't say it's fiction. It doesn't say it was concocted in the 70s, right? It's very interesting.
Right. Yeah. Lovecraft said it wasn't real, but that's exactly what he would say.
Right. Exactly. Now, what's great is, the Peter Levenda thing gets deeper. So I read a large portion of this book called The Dark Lord by Peter Levenda, and he's an interesting guy, and he's still out there around. I'm gonna try to get a hold of him and see if we can get him to do a dark room episode. We'll see if that happens. But he talks about another figure named Kenneth Grant. Now, we all know, the three of us, I'm sure, and probably some of our listeners know about Thelema, right?
Yeah.
Crowley's occult order.
Do what thou will shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.
Yes.
Quick footnote here, by the way, Algernon Blackwood and Arthur Machen, the two weird fiction authors who we mentioned earlier in the episode who influenced H.P. Lovecraft, both of them knew Crowley personally and were members of the Order of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah.
So that's another one.
See, that all connects. So now, so Crowley, there's another person, and there's many people, obviously Algernon Blackwood and all this. There's many people involved in the Crowley sphere. When we do the Crowley episode, that's going to be 4 hours probably. One of these people is named Kenneth Grant. Now, Kenneth Grant expanded Thelema to another order called the Typhonian Order. He kind of extended Crowley's work. So part of what Crowley was doing, and anybody correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a Crowley expert, but this is hopefully, I'm saying enough about him for this chain of thought to make sense. Part of what Crowley was doing was searching through the various religious traditions around the world, trying to seek sort of correspondences. Right. This shows up in this religion and this shows up in this religion. They're comparable. And so that means that there's more validity to them. That means this is something that we should work into our syncretic order.
Syncretism is the word, correct?
Yes.
And we can use yoga with Kabbalah, with meditation,
right,
with prayer, with visual practices, and then of course with the big dirty.
Right.
Other.
It's like Joseph Campbell, except like let's actually have this religion. Let's actually believe this and put it into practice.
Yeah, it's not just that's neat, right?
Yeah.
Kenneth Grant basically does the same thing, except he goes to some different sources. He goes to Afro-Caribbean sources, he goes to voodoo sources, and he goes to Lovecraft as though it is a religious as though it is its own religion, to treat it in the same kind of vein as looking in all of these other sources, and integrates Lovecraft's what people would think of as his creations into this order as entities that exist in the Typhonian order of Thelema. Typhonian is from Typhon. Typhon is to call it a sea monster is selling it short, but that would be probably the most normie way to look at it. It's sort of an ancient sea monster that you can trace the lineage of back to Sumeria. Okay, so now. Okay, so fine. This Kenneth Grant guy says, "Yeah, Lovecraft's monsters are real." Okay, one guy says it. What does that mean? Peter Levenda, in his book The Dark Lord, points out a handful of interesting correspondences between Lovecraft and Crowley, and I'll give you one of them that's very interesting. So, in the year 1907. Crowley is writing a series of texts that he says are coming, that are basically being channeled to him, would be probably the easiest way to put it. Getting messages from something that he calls the Dark Lord, right? So now Lovecraft may have known who Crowley was. Crowley almost certainly didn't know who Lovecraft was. There's no evidence that Lovecraft read any Crowley, though he may have been sort of tangentially aware of the man. I don't think Crowley was as popularly known then in his own time as he is now.
He was very well known, though. He was a popular short story writer. He had stories published in the Strand and other magazines in the UK. I mean, he was a fiction author. Yeah, he was well known for that.
Right. Okay, so he's in that he's definitely in that tradition. So anyway, in 1907, he's sort of channeling this stuff. Now, in 1907, what is Lovecraft up to? 1907, Lovecraft is in his reclusive post-high school, or coming into his reclusive post-high school year. 1907 is a year that I believe Lovecraft actually has to take off of school for having some kind of nervous breakdown. And if it's not a year he has to take off, it's a year that he takes a lesser schedule. It's like he's starting to fail high school in 1907, right? Crowley writes, among many things at this time, he writes a text called Libere vel Lapidus Lazuli. I probably pronounced that completely wrong.
You did okay. I think you did all right.
In which he includes the word Cthulhu and claims that he has no idea where this word came from or what it means. Furthermore, in another text he's writing at the same time called Liber Cordis Cincti Serpenti, Crowley refers to the abyss of the great deep and to Typhon, who has the appearance of an old gnarled fish with tentacles. So it sounds like he had an encounter with Cthulhu in 1907. Now, okay, what's the big deal with 1907? Not only is Crowley having some kind of nervous breakdown, but in his story, The Call of Cthulhu, he backdates it.
Lovecraft is having a breakdown.
Lovecraft is having a breakdown in 1907. Later in 26, when he's writing Call of Cthulhu, he sets one of the primary events in 1907, October 31st to November 1st of 1907, precisely at the same time frame in which Crowley is writing these texts in which he refers to Cthulhu. Okay, so there's very strange correspondence. Now, there's even more to this. Call of Cthulhu, part of Call of Cthulhu is on October 31st, 1907, something emerges. That's like the thrust of it. And the one character who brings this clay tablets to the main character's great uncle has crazy dreams that something has emerged onto this planet and sort of started feeding these ideas and these energies out, right? So that's what Lovecraft's story is about, and it's about it happening at the same date that Crowley is channeling the word Cthulhu. Okay, there's a little bit more to
this. Just one small.
Correct me, Ben, because
just a tiny little thing.
Sure.
Just that Cthulhu doesn't land on Earth at that time. Cthulhu is supposed to have been sleeping on Earth since sometime 100 million years ago. Right. Apparently, in 1907, he sort of wakes up from hibernation a little bit and shakes his tentacles.
Right, exactly. Now, the Norwegian in Call of Cthulhu, is the Norwegian on the fishing boat, is that encounter supposed to have happened in 1907 also?
The dates of the story, I would have to check.
Okay,
I can't remember.
I'm not expecting you to necessarily. You're such an encyclopedia. I just assume you know every sentence, so that's not fair.
Specific dates that events happen within each story. Yeah, that's a lot.
Lovecraft is so specific. That's what's so weird. It's like, why did he pick 1907? Why did he pick this date? Right now, here's another couple of things that Peter Levinda says. That they make this even just a little bit stranger, because now this word is very strange, Cthulhu, right? And Peter Levinda calls out these linguistic oddities. One thing that Peter Levinda calls out is that apparently, and this could be total BS, I mean, this is the same guy who wrote the Necronomicon and sort of halfway posed it as a real book. So who knows what Peter Levinda is being real about? Who knows what he's making up? But he claims that in Tibetan, the word Cthulhu refers to a shaman and to one who has died and returned. Now, would Lovecraft have his hands on Tibetan language based on his butchering of Arabic? Probably not, right? He would have known Latin and Greek a little bit, but I doubt he would have known an actual Tibetan word. Further,
it's also worth pointing out, by the way, that Lovecraft actually provided in one of his personal letters a guide on how to pronounce the name of Cthulhu, and it's nothing like the way that most people pronounce it.
How does he pronounce it?
He says that you should actually press your tongue to the roof of your mouth and try to say, and while your tongue is pressed to the roof of your mouth, try to say klokla. So, so as far as these like phonetic links, I would say that kind of makes those phonetic links kind of tough to make.
Oh, agreed. Yeah. But then why? I guess you have to spell it somehow. I guess it's almost arbitrary how you spell it if the noise is literally klok. Yeah. So anyway, this is all just kind of fun anyway. One other thing though, according to Peter Levinda, in Kurdish, apparently the word for God is something like kudu, similar to the Sumerian word kutu, which apparently, again, this is all coming from Levinda. I don't know that any of this is factual, but it's interesting. The Sumerian word kutu, which apparently is the name of a biblical city that was believed by the Sumerians to be the gate to the underworld. So Peter Levinda's, what he's saying and what Kenneth Grant is also saying is that Crowley was actually channeling something. And now he may have been, well, I'm an atheist and these are just visions. He was haunted by these night gaunts. He had lucid dreams. You can have those experiences and walk away from them and just say, well, that was my brain going crazy. But if there were interdimensional cosmic beings that were communicating to you directly through your consciousness, maybe you would lie to yourself that was a hallucination just to maintain your sanity.
And Lovecraft would frequently write stories, as I mentioned earlier on the episode. He would wake up from a nightmare and start writing the story like while he was still half asleep having the nightmare. Nyarlathotep is one of the most famously the story that he wrote almost while he was literally still having the dream as he wrote the first draft. Right.
And so that's like a mystical practice as far as I'm concerned. But so it's just interesting. And then Kenneth Grant took this fairly seriously as part of his branch, the Typhonian order of Thelema, that this was the figures that Lovecraft described were sort of part of his pantheon. And he believed that in trying to commune with them, that you would, I think what Kenneth Grant was trying to accomplish was he was trying to push humanity into the next eon, essentially. I think that was that's my understanding of what Kenneth Grant's
we are going to have so much opportunity to dive into that vein of weirdness, and Lovecraft is right next door to it.
Yes.
He's there. He could be the entree. I do think the main course, of course, will be Mr. Crowley, because once that starts, then
I have so many questions about Crowley. So,
oh my God, dude! I'm ashamed to say I've read way too much Crowley. I spent a lot of time in university when I should have been doing other things, and then I ended up in the theater, and then I ended up doing a podcast. And I blame.
It was all in preparation for our Crowley episode.
Maybe. What about you, Ben? Have you dabbled with the beast himself, 666?
The great beast that slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. That beast. Yes, I've done a bit. Yeah, it's interesting because Crowley's. You can come at Crowley from so many different ways. He was, like I said, he was known as a fiction author primarily in his own day. I've read a lot of his short stories. Some of them are good. None of them are great, I wouldn't necessarily say. There's one called The Testament of Magdalene Blair that I highly recommend. It's one of the greatest horror stories, in my opinion, ever written. And then there's also the Thelema side. Thelema, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But the magic with a K, the actual practice stuff. And it's weird. It's really, really weird stuff. If you do you draw the circles and you light the candles and you say the rituals and you speak the incantations and the invocations, and sometimes a god's voice speaks to you, and it's really, really weird. And I don't know what to make of it. I take kind of the approach, I guess I would say sort of a Buddhist approach of like, this is just a thing that happens and I've observed it, and what to make of it, I don't know.
Well, okay, good to know, Ben. We might need a little help here, depending on how things go with the markets this week. Right. And then of course Brad's throwing the tarot cards. This is good. We're getting a little coven of dudes together here.
Yeah, I like this. This.
You mentioned Grant Morrison too.
Yes,
I'm such a huge fan of his great speech that he gave about actually doing the. Do you know the one that I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, we're making your sigil and everything. Yeah.
Oh yeah, incredible stuff. I wonder. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, if the real through line from Lovecraft to these guys like Grant Morrison is Robert Anton Wilson, who I don't know if you guys are familiar, but yes. Robert Anton Wilson wrote the Illuminatus trilogy, which references Lovecraft's mythos throughout, and would be major influence on The Invisibles. Grant Morrison's The Invisibles is based on Robert Anton Wilson's The Illuminatus trilogy. So basically, if you're looking for the through line from Lovecraft through hippie culture to Grant Morrison and Alan Moore and these later comic authors, Robert Anton Wilson is the connecting piece there.
Yeah. We're going to do a Robert Anton Wilson episode eventually.
A fellow Invisibles stan. You don't often.
Dude,
please. Yeah. Dude, yeah. I had John Lennon come to me in a dream. Oh, good. It's all happening. One of us.
Oh man, I listened to the Frank Herbert episode. I was like, dude, I have "Fear is the Mind Killer" in Arabic tattooed on my chest. I was like, why was I not there for the Frank Herbert?
We're gonna bring Ben back for the Frank Herbert Dark Room.
Frank Herbert then comes on.
Very forward.
Yeah. Oh, my friend, it really, really good to get to know you a little bit, and I appreciate your depth of knowledge here about Lovecraft. Brad, did you have anything else that you wanted to hit on?
I didn't have anything in particular that I wanted to hit on. One thing we didn't quite hit on, which is just funny, is that sometime in the 30s, some of Lovecraft's friends spiked his punch at a little get together. Now he was a pro-prohibition guy that became somewhat diluted a little bit later, but straight-laced, never drank to his own knowledge. He drinks at this dinner party. He is apparently hilarious and gregarious, talking to everybody. Somebody gives an opinion that he doesn't like, and he sort of laughingly shouts out, "Bullshit!" And and it's just a hilarious story. And even like after that, he would proudly declare that, "Oh, I've never had a drop of liquor." And I just think that's really charming that his friends kind of dosed him up just to see, and he enjoyed it. And you wonder, like, I know we've had a lot of horror stories on Art of Darkness, and we all know them from our, from personal lives and everything else, of people who went too far down the drugs and or alcohol route. And yet, maybe if Lovecraft, Ben mentioned this in the notes, maybe if Lovecraft had a drink now and then.
You could have just cracked open a beer on the weekend. What might have been?
Right.
He might have released a novel.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the erotic short stories of H.P. Lovecraft? He's had a few IPAs, and now he's really feeling amorous. And,
right. Just get the shoulder, just get a little loose in the hips and shoulders.
I was a nervous kid too, man.
Yeah, you don't got to get hammered. You can just kind of
yeah. And it's funny to try and imagine alcoholic H.P. Lovecraft.
Right.
Or just Lovecraft that was able to drink enough to loosen up.
Yeah, dancing. Just a little just dancing.
Just a little fun. Speaking of a little fun, there is one other thing that I wanted to bring in. It's just so much fun. There's a story called The Challenge from Beyond that came out in, I believe, 1931. I'm going to double check this here. Yeah,
it was later.
You might
have it there.
I'm gonna double check right now but basically what this is a weird fiction crew track. This is a posse cut. With H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, C.L. Moore, A. Merritt, and Frank Belknap Long, which is basically the A-team. the 1930s weird fiction A-Team.
Yeah.
And this story is like a Rick and Morty episode. It starts with the first couple of we could call them verses, I guess. They're pages. Are C.L. Moore and A. Merritt, and it's about this guy who like goes out into his yard and finds a cube, and the cube is glowing and it's talking to him, and you're like, okay, what are we going to do? And then we get to Lovecraft's verse. And Lovecraft's verse is like the Method Man verse on the Posse Cut. Lovecraft's verse is like the cube transported his consciousness into the body of a millipede creature that lived on the other side of the galaxy and was the member of this millipede race that had stored knowledge for eons and was seeking to fight another far more ancient race of other creatures who had colonized the stars. And when he looked down at his own body, he saw with horror that he was imprisoned in the body of a giant millipede. And you're like, that's where Lovecraft takes it.
That's right.
Then Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan the Barbarian, comes in. And Robert E. Howard is like, he looked down at his body and realized he was a millipede. And he realized this millipede creature was jacked. He realized he could be the king of the millipedes. He conquered the millipede empire.
Right.
And Robert E. Howard's verse ends with the millipede king like sitting on his bejeweled throne atop a mountain of treasure with his like limbs being stroked by millipede hookers. And this is like that's Robert.
Perfect.
That's Robert.
Perfect.
That's where Robert E. Howard takes it. And then the final verse is Frank Belknap Long, which is the millipede consciousness gets transferred back into the man's body, and then the millipedes end up taking over the earth. So it's just that story is called The Challenge from Beyond. It's a posse cut. I don't know what else to call it.
Yeah,
it's like,
they must have had so much fun with that. Yeah.
And I really want to do it, honestly, Brad. Like I want to do it with like me and you and a couple other people.
That would be fun.
That would be fun.
The Challenge from Beyond Part 2.
Yeah.
The Challenge from Beyond the Beyond. Beyonder. The Challenge from Beyonder. That's really fun. I mean, that's like kids trying to top each other. Kids in a campfire story.
Exactly. Well, and it shows you how much this correspondence was happening. It's interesting that there's this community. We think we need the internet for this community building, and it's super helpful, but like they were doing it the old-fashioned way, just joining organizations and sending letters and and putting out fanzines and your own newsletter, and
they would circulate round robin letters. I just found out about round robin letters a few years ago. Do you guys know about this? This was like the earliest social media. You would mail a letter to your friend. Your friend would then like respond to it, then mail it to a third person, fourth person, fifth. Each person's like adding to the thread. It's like a social media thread that circulates as a letter. And this was like a common practice in Lovecraft's
day. It's
day.
Pretty cool. Yeah, his friends, the Kelmar was him and Lovecraft and his 4 other friends, including, I don't remember who all was in it, somebody named Kleiner. Anyway, Kelmar, it was their initials, I think. They did round robin letters that they would send to each other, and everybody would get it. And you were in letter writing mode then, so it was actually probably pretty quick. You get it and you probably write it that day and send it out the next day, and a week later it shows back up at your door. Sounds pretty fun.
I have one kind of final semi-serious question to close this out. Do you, and this is good because now that we've opened the Lovecraft box, we can always have Ben on to come on. Like if a new Lovecraft type product comes out, like a piece of media, we can do an hour. I mean it. I mean, that's what this show's all about. We want to be doing this for a long time. Do you think that, and maybe I'll put this to both of you. At the end of his life, it sounded like he had some disappointments. Do you think that he felt like he could have been more, quote unquote, literary and not in this kind of weird ghetto of kind of weird pop genre? Is that part of what his disappointment was, Brad? Or do you think it was more pure, like he felt like he hadn't achieved his own voice? What sense do you have?
I think in the end, my take on it is that he didn't think he had fully expressed what he could express. I think he had mixed feelings about the genre that he worked in. I think if he allowed himself to be a little bit arrogant, I think he probably would have saw that he was the kind of the cream of the crop. Though there's a lot of other talented people playing in that same sandbox. But, he was sort of like an art for art's sake kind of guy. He didn't want to be commercial. So I don't think it's that he didn't sell a bunch that would have disappointed him, but that he maybe didn't achieve creatively what he thought he could create. Yeah,
I agree with that. Really, like the only thing that I would add is just that he never really had any time for realist fiction. We know from his letters to his friends that he was reading T.S. Eliot and Joyce and Faulkner and the people who were Hemingway and the people who were coming out during his life. Yeah. He was reading it, and he just wasn't impressed. Also, wasn't impressed with horror cinema. Interestingly enough, went to see the Universal Dracula and Frankenstein. Was really unimpressed with those. What he wanted to, all he ever really wanted to do was translate his dreams into words and get other people to dream the same dreams that he was dreaming. And I think that his real frustration, the only area where he really felt like he fell short, was he felt like he never quite got his dreams onto paper. I think that's the thing that he felt like he never quite got.
I think that's and none of us ever do.
None of us ever do. Here's my horror. Have a look at my horror and please share my nightmares.
A little bit.
All right. Well, boys, that was incredible. Thank you so much, Ben. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
artofthepod.com. You know who we are. Get in the Telegram, and Ben, we'll have you back on at some juncture, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
We're going to do the
houseblackwood.net, guys. And look forward to seeing you, talking to you soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ben. Much appreciated. We'll talk soon. All right. Good night, guys. Bye.